It's getting dangerous. What is this danger? You're pretty close. What do you think? Another inch higher. Oh, eyeballs. Work, eyeballs. Ooh, that's slippery.
After a week of unprecedented devastation, thousands of homes destroyed and lives lost. Entire towns decimated, but little comfort for the residents of Detroit. The resort town's completely gone. Even the town's fire trucks melted. Across the West, overwhelming loss, heartache, and for so many, fear that with the fire season just beginning, the worst is yet to come.
And taking a tragic toll, the magnitude of which is still unknown.
Never in the American West has so much burned so quickly or so destructively. Never in the American West has so much burned so quickly or so destructively.
No?
Fueled by dangerous winds. This morning, police say the fires that tore through the towns of Talent and Phoenix, Oregon, destroying about 1,000 homes and killing 5 people, were intentionally started.
We were able to locate evidence and determine that this individual is likely the cause of the fire.
Michael Gerard Bakela was
the
charged
busiest
with 2
man
counts
on the
of
planet
arson and multiple counts of criminal mischief. This was a week of extremes.
Criminal mischief.
Record-shattering heat, bone-dry humidity, and powerful winds.
Where blowtorch wind sent wildfires racing anew today.
Entire communities were wiped out.
It's been pretty calm here all day, but all it takes is a little bit of wind, and then this.
Block after block, leveled. This is how a neighborhood in Phoenix, Oregon looked until it was obliterated. In Berry Creek, California, the so-called Bear Fire came through so fast it overran a fire station. 2 trucks still inside.
This used to be a beautiful lakeside community with homes nestled in the woods, and now you look
trees
everywhere. There's
with
construction.
Leaves.
The homes here have been incinerated.
The homes are incinerated, and there's green leaves.
This is a climate dam emergency. This is real. This is the perfect storm. It is happening in unprecedented ways.
Another governor making multiple disaster tours, Washington's Jay Inslee.
California, Oregon, and Washington, we are all in the same soup of cataclysmic fire. And these are conditions that are exacerbated by the changing climate that we are suffering.
With our crane camera, I want to show you this world of pink laid down around me, and still it did nothing to stop the progress of that fire, which incinerated entire neighborhoods, entire developments here.
The debate is over.
With standing trees with leaves.
With all of your research, what's the sort of big takeaway about how these fires interact with our homes?
I think the biggest takeaway is to just realize that wildfires and wildland fires in general are a natural phenomena. While they are natural phenomena, them burning down homes doesn't necessarily have to happen.
It's a guided tour through hell.
And you're looking at a scene that is probably reminiscent of hell.
Devastation looks and feels apocalyptic.
Looks like a bomb went off.
While houses on the ground explode.
into fireballs.
And there are things that homeowner and property owners can do to make their building and homes wildfire resistant.
So if it's not the wall of flames that's burning down most of the homes, what is burning down most of the homes? So if it's not the wall of flames that's burning down most of the homes, what is burning down most of the homes?
If it's not...
What is burning down most of the homes?
Just going from a house to a pile of ash.
As you can see around me here, this property is a prime example of what creating a defensible space should look like. They kept the grass cut and the trees trimmed, but still, it wasn't enough.
Climate scientists point to human behavior, namely burning of fossil fuels, including coal and oil, for increased temperatures that decimate forests
cutting-edge technology
and make them prone to burn. The scenes and sickening air underscore for many that the climate is in crisis. Washington's Governor Jay Inslee.
I think we have to start thinking there are more climate fires, because that's what creates the conditions that makes them so explosive.
High winds acting like natural kerosene.
This is real.
One last question for you, Jeff. We heard California Governor Gavin Newsom talking about how these fires are linked to climate change. To anybody out there who still doubts that or thinks that those remarks are political, what do you have to say?
Well, with that said, it would be disingenuous to not say that, yeah, this has something to do with, the human error or intentional human folly, if you will. There's some of that because fires just don't start. That it just doesn't self-combust.
I mean, it would have to be, like, if it was arson, it would take an army of people to do this. Because the distances and time, and each one's a few miles wide. Each one's a couple miles wide. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, plus half the state. I mean, this fire that just spread is absolutely unbelievable.
Hey, good morning, Eva. Overnight, sheriffs announced they charged a man with 2 counts of arson for the fires in that Medford area that torched whole towns, 1,000 homes incinerated. Several people were killed, and there's still 50 people missing there. And because there was a loss of life there, that man could face murder charges.
Oh, my God. An apocalyptic drive. Smoldering forests and choking air. This is a journey through Molalla in western Oregon.
Oh, can't see it. Deer Park. Oh, lost it. Lost it again. Oh, wait, what happened here? What's going on?
Popular with the Swiss. The point on which they disagreed in particular was the question of taxes. The Swiss, who were a simple and thrifty people, objected to paying taxes of any sort. They said they wanted to spend their money on all kinds of other things. Gessler, on the other hand, wished to put a tax on everything, and being governor, he did it. He made everyone who owned a flock of sheep pay a certain sum of money to him, and if the farmer sold his sheep and bought cows, he had to pay rather more money to Gessler for the cows than he had paid for the sheep. Gessler also taxed bread and biscuits and jam and buns and lemonade, and in fact everything he could think of, till the people of Switzerland determined to complain. They appointed Walter Fürst, who had red hair and looked fierce, Werner Stauffacher, who had gray hair and was always wondering how he ought to pronounce his name, and Arnold of Melchthal, who had light yellow hair and was supposed to know a great deal about the law, to make the complaint. They called on the governor one lovely morning in April, and were shown into the hall of audience.
That scarf?
Well, said Gessler, and what's the matter now? The other two pushed Walter Fürst forward because he looked fierce, and they thought he might frighten the governor.
Dimbals had always, he felt, disliked him. They'd probably asked Jane to stay with them, been interfering somehow, no doubt. He must go down to Northumberland and see Dimble. The idea of being annoyed with the Dimbles occurred to Mark almost as an inspiration. To bluster a little as an injured husband in search of his wife would be a pleasant change for the attitudes he had recently been compelled to adopt. On the way downtown he stopped to have a drink. As he came to the Bristol and saw the NICE placard on it, he had almost said, "Oh, damn," and turned away, before he suddenly remembered that he was himself a high official in the NICE, and by no means a member of that general public whom the Bristol now excluded. They asked him who he was at the door, and became obsequious when he told them. There was a pleasant fire burning. After the grueling day he had had, he felt justified in ordering a large whisky, and after it he had a second. It completed the change in his mental weather which had begun at the moment when he first conceived the idea of having a grievance against the Dimbles. The whole state of Edgestowe had something to do with it. There was an element in him to which all these exhibitions of power suggested chiefly how much nicer and how much more appropriate it was, all said and done, to be part of the NICE than to be an outsider. Even now, had he been taking all this démarche about a murder trial too seriously? Of course, that was the way Wither managed things. He liked to have something hanging over everyone. It was only a way to keep him at Belbury and to make him send for Jane. And when one came to think of it, why not? She couldn't go on indefinitely living alone. And the wife of a man who meant to have a career and live at the centre of things would have to learn to be a woman of the world. Anyway, the first thing was to see that fellow Dimble. He left the Bristol feeling, as he would have said, a different man. Indeed, he was a different man. From now onwards, till the moment of final decision should meet him, the different men in him appeared with startling rapidity, and each seemed very complete while it lasted. Thus, skidding violently from one side to the other, his youth approached the moment at which he would begin to be a person. 3. "Come in," said Dimble in his rooms at Northumberland. He had just finished with his last pupil for the day, and was intending to start for St. Anne's in a few minutes. "Oh, it's you, Studdock."
People who really are focused on their own political goals and they try to shoehorn the Constitution in to fit with that, whether the founders agreed or not. I've always thought that that was a huge problem, and Otis, I think, agrees. But going further, he says, prudence and fortitude are likewise essential. If he has not prudence, he may needlessly irritate your enemies. That makes sense. Like, if you're not smart about how you approach things, you're just going to run in like bull, and maybe you're going to create some problems. Otis says if he has not fortitude, he may timidly give up your just rights.
He added as the door opened, "Come in." He tried to speak naturally, but he was surprised at the visit and shocked by what he saw.
Walter Fürst coughed. "Well?" asked Gessler. "Ahem," said Walter Fürst. "That's the way," whispered Werner. "Give it him." "Ahem," said Walter Fürst again. "The fact is, your governorship—" "It's a small point," interrupted Gessler, "but I'm generally called Your Excellency. Yes. The fact is, Your Excellency, it seems to the people of Switzerland—" "Whom I represent," whispered Arnold of Melchthal. "Whom I represent, that things want changing." What things? Inquired Gessler. The taxes, your excellent governorship. Change the taxes. Why, don't the people of Switzerland think there are enough taxes? Arnold of Melchthal broke in hastily. They think there are many too many, he said. What with the tax on sheep, and the tax on cows, and the tax on bread, and the tax on tea, and the tax— I know, Gessler interrupted. I know all the taxes. Come to the point. What about them? Well, your excellency, there are too many of them. Too many? Yes, and we are not going to put up with it any longer, shouted Arnold of Melchthal. Gessler leaned forward in his throne. Might I ask you to repeat that remark? He said. We are not going to put up with it any longer. Gessler sat back again with an ugly smile. Oh, he said. Oh, indeed. You aren't you? Desire the Lord High Executioner to step this way, he added to a soldier who stood beside him. The Lord High Executioner entered the presence. He was a kind-looking old gentleman with white hair, and he wore a beautiful black robe, tastefully decorated with death's heads. Your Excellency sent for me, he said. Just so, replied Gessler. This gentleman here, he pointed to Arnold of Melchthal, says he does not like taxes, and that he isn't going to put up with them any longer.
Of course, people who are just have no backbone, they just go with the wind, right? But here's the money quote. There is, however, no character so dangerous to liberty as the man of prudence. And this is a great example of things we hear today. I hear this type of thing all the time. And this is what Otis put in italics. He says, you may possibly be right, but at this not prudent to insist upon it. How often have we all heard this? Like, oh yeah, I agree that that's a problem, but this is, it's not the time. It's not the time. I actually heard this a lot when opposing the war in Iraq when it first started. Like, okay, well, now's not the time to make constitutional arguments. We have to get behind our boys overseas. And you can pick and choose just about any major constitutional violation, and sometimes small ones. And I've got an example coming up in a little bit. And you'll hear the same type of thing. And that's basically the man of prudence, the character who says now is not the time. It's always now is not the time. And Otis says this is the language of artful courtiers maybe, and has done more hurt than can well be imagined. And that brings me to that other example, the bump stock ban of 2018. Instead of opposing, and I did an episode on this, I'm going to link to this in the show notes. I haven't actually checked it out in quite a while. This is back in December 19, 2018, the unconstitutional bump stock ban and what to do about it. Ooh.
Tut, tut, murmured the executioner. See what you can do for him. Certainly, Your Excellency. Robert, he cried, is the oil on the boil? Just this minute boiled over, replied a voice from the other side of the door. Then bring it in, and mind you don't spill any.
Studdock's face appeared to him to have changed since they last met. It had grown fatter and paler, and there was a new vulgarity in the expression. I've come to ask about Jane, said Mark. Do you know where she is? I can't give you her address, I'm afraid, said Dimble. Do you mean you don't know it? I can't give it, said Dimble. According to Mark's program, this was the point at which he should have begun to take a strong line. But he did not feel the same now that he was in the room. Dimble had always treated him with scrupulous politeness, and Mark had always felt that Dimble disliked him. This had not made him dislike Dimble. It had only made him uneasily talkative in Dimble's presence and anxious to please. Vindictiveness was by no means one of Mark's vices, for Mark liked to be liked. A snub sent him away dreaming of not revenge, but of brilliant jokes or achievements which would one day conquer the goodwill of the man who had snubbed him. If he were ever cruel, it would be downwards to inferiors and outsiders who solicited his regard, not upwards to those who rejected it. There was a good deal of the spaniel in him. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I don't understand." "If you have any regard for your wife's safety, you will not ask me to tell you where she has gone," said Dimble. "Safety?" "Safety," repeated Dimble with great sternness. "Safety from what?" "Well, don't you know what has happened?" "What's happened?" "On the night of the big riot, the institutional police attempted to arrest her. She escaped, but not before they had tortured her." "Tortured her? What do you mean?" "Burned her with cigars." "Well, that's what I've come about," said Mark. "Jane, I'm afraid she is on the verge of a nervous breakdown. That didn't really happen, you know." "The doctor who dressed the burns thinks otherwise." "Great Scott," said Mark. "So they really did? But look here." Under the quiet stare of Dimble, he found it difficult to speak. "Well, why have I not been told of this outrage?" he shouted.
Enter Robert, in a suit of armor and a black mask, carrying a large cauldron from which the steam rose in great clouds. "Now, sir, if you please," said the executioner politely to Arnold of Melchthal. Arnold looked at the cauldron. "Why, it's hot," he said. "Warmish," admitted the executioner. "It's against the law to threaten a man with hot oil." "You may bring an action against me," said the executioner. "Now, sir, if you please, we are wasting time. The forefinger of your left hand, if I may trouble you." "Thank you. I am obliged." He took Arnold's left hand and dipped the tip of the first finger into the oil. "Ow!" cried Arnold, jumping. "Don't let him see he's hurting you," whispered Werner Stauffacher. "Pretend you don't notice it." Gessler leaned forward again. "Have your views on taxes changed at all?" he asked. "Do you see my point of view more clearly now?" Arnold admitted that he thought that, after all, there might be something to be said for it. "That's right," said the governor. "And the tax on sheep? You don't object to that?" "No." "And the tax on cows?" "I like it." "And those on bread, and buns, and lemonade?" "I enjoy them." "Excellent. In fact, you're quite contented." "Quite." "And you think the rest of the people are?" "Oh, quite. "And do you think the same?" he asked of Walter and Werner. "Oh, yes, Your Excellency!" they cried. "Then that's all right," said Gessler. "I was sure you would be sensible about it. Now, if you will kindly place in the tambourine which the gentleman on my left is presenting to you a mere trifle to compensate us for our trouble in giving you an audience, and if you," to Arnold of Melchthal, "will contribute an additional trifle for use of the imperial boiling oil, I think we shall all be satisfied. You've done it. That's right. Goodbye, and mind the step as you go out." And as he finished this speech, the three spokesmen of the people of Switzerland were shown out of the Hall of Audience.
By your colleagues? Asked Dimble dryly. It is an odd question to ask me. You ought to understand the workings of the NICE better than I do. Well, why didn't you tell me? Why has nothing been done about it? Have you been to the police? The institutional police? No, the ordinary police. Do you really not know that there are no ordinary police left in Edgestoke? Well, I suppose there are some magistrates. There is the Emergency Commissioner, Lord Featherstone. You seem to misunderstand. This is a conquered and occupied city. Then why, in heaven's name, didn't you get on to me? You, said Dimble. For one moment, the first for many years, Mark saw himself exactly as a man like Dimble saw him. It almost took his breath away. Look here, he said. You don't... Oh, it's too fantastic. You don't imagine I knew about it? You don't really believe I send policemen about to manhandle my own wife? He had begun on the note of indignation, but ended by trying to insinuate a little jocularity. If only Dimble would give even the ghost of a smile, anything to move the conversation onto a different level. But Dimble said nothing, and his face did not relax. He had not, in fact, been perfectly sure that Mark might not have sunk even to this, but out of charity he did not wish to say so. I know you've always disliked me, said Mark.
Pay attention.
But I didn't know it was quite as bad as that. And again Dimble was silent, but for a reason Mark could not guess. The truth was that his shaft had gone home. Dimble's conscience had for years accused him of a lack of charity towards Studdock, and he had struggled to amend it. He was struggling now. Well, said Studdock in a dry voice, after the silence had lasted for several seconds. There doesn't seem to be much more to say. I insist on being told where Jane is. Do you want her to be taken to Belbury? Mark winced. It was as if the other had read the very thought he had had in the Bristol half an hour ago. I don't see, Dimble, he said, why I should be cross-questioned in this way. Where is my wife? I have no permission to tell you. She is not in my house nor under my protection. She is well and happy and safe. If you still have the slightest regard for her happiness, you will make no attempt to get in touch with her. Am I a sort of leper or criminal that I can't even be trusted to know her address? Excuse me. You are a member of the NICE who have already insulted, tortured, and arrested her. Since her escape, she has been left alone only because your colleagues do not know where she is. And if it really was the NICE police, do you suppose I'm not going to have a very full explanation out of them? Damn it, what do you take me for? I can only hope that you have no power in the NICE at all. If you have no power, then you cannot protect her. If you have, then you are identified with its policy. In neither case will I help you to discover where Jane is. Oh, this is fantastic, said Mark. Even if I do happen to hold a job in the NICE for the moment, you know me. I do not know you, said Dimble. I have no conception of your aims or motives. He seemed to Mark to be looking at him, not with anger or contempt, but with that degree of loathing which produces in those who feel it a kind of embarrassment, as if he were an obscenity which decent people are forced, for very shame, to pretend that they have not noticed. In this Mark was quite mistaken. In reality, his presence was acting on Dimble as a summons to rigid self-control. Dimble was simply trying very hard not to hate, not to despise, above all not to enjoy hating and despising, and he had no idea of the fixed severity which this effort gave to his face. The whole of the rest of the conversation went on under this misunderstanding. There has been some ridiculous mistake, said Mark. I tell you, I'll look into it thoroughly. I'll make a row. I suppose some newly enrolled policeman got drunk or something. Well, he'll be broken. It was the chief of your police, Miss Hardcastle herself, who did it. Very well, I'll break her then. Did you suppose I was going to take it lying down? But there must be some mistake. It can't... Do you know Miss Hardcastle well? Asked Dimble. Mark was silenced, and he thought, quite wrongly, that Dimble was reading his mind to the bottom, and seeing there his certainty that Miss Hardcastle had done this very thing, and that he had no more power of calling her to account than of stopping the revolution of the earth. Suddenly the immobility of Dimble's face changed, and he spoke in a new voice. Have you the means to bring her to book? He said. Are you already as near the centre of Belbury as that? If so, then you have consented to the murder of Hingist, the murder of Compton. If so, it was by your orders that Mary Prescott was raped and battered to death in the sheds behind the station. It is with your approval that criminals, honest criminals whose hands you are unfit to touch, are being taken from the jails to which British judges sent them on the conviction of British juries and packed off to Belbury to undergo for an indefinite period, out of reach of the law, whatever tortures and assaults on personal identity you call remedial treatment. It is you who have driven 2,000 families from their homes to die of exposure in every ditch from here to Birmingham or Worcester. It is you who can tell us why Place and Rowley and Cunningham, at 80 years of age, have been arrested, and where they are. And if you are as deeply in it as that, not only will I not deliver Jane into your hands, but I would not deliver my dog. Oh, really, said Mark, this is absurd. I know one or two high-handed things have been done. You always get some of the wrong sort in a police force, especially at first. But, I mean to say, what have I ever done that you should make me responsible for every action that any NICE official has taken, or is said to have taken, in the gutter press? Gutter press? Thundered Dimble, who seemed to Mark to be even physically larger than he was a few minutes before. What nonsense is this? Do you suppose I don't know that you have control of every paper in the country except one, and that one has not appeared this morning? Its printers have gone on strike. The poor dupes say they will not print articles attacking the People's Institute. Where the lies in all the other papers come from, you know better than I. It may seem strange to say that Mark, having long lived in a world without charity, had nevertheless very seldom met real anger. Malice in plenty he had encountered, but it all operated by snubs and sneers and stabbing in the back. The forehead and eyes and voice of this elderly man had an effect on him which was stifling and unnerving. At Belbury, one used the words whining and yapping to describe any opposition which the actions of Belbury aroused in the outer world. And Mark had never had enough imagination to realize what the whining would really be like if you met it face to face. I tell you I knew nothing about it, he shouted. Damn it, I'm the injured party. The way you talk, anyone would think it was your wife who'd been ill-treated. So it might have been. So it may be. It may be any man or woman in England. It was a woman and a citizen. What does it matter whose wife it was? But I tell you I'll raise hell about it. I'll break the infernal bitch who did it, if it means breaking the whole NICE. Dimble said nothing. Mark knew that Dimble knew that he was talking nonsense. Yet Mark could not stop. If he did not bluster, he would not know what to say. Sooner than put up with this, he shouted, I'll leave the NICE. Do you mean that? Asked Dimble with a sharp glance. And to Mark, whose ideas were now all one fluid confusion of wounded vanity and jostling fears and shames, this glance once more appeared accusing and intolerable. In reality, it had been a glance of awakened hope, for charity hopes all things. But there was caution in it, and between hope and caution, Dimble found himself once more reduced to silence. I see you don't trust me, said Mark, instinctively summoning to his face the manly and injured expression which had often served him well in headmasters' studies. Dimble was a truthful man. No, he said after a longish pause. I don't quite. Mark shrugged his shoulders and turned away. Studdock, said Dimble, this is not a time for foolery or compliments. It may be that both of us are within a few minutes of death. You have probably been shadowed into the college, and I, at any rate, don't propose to die with polite insincerities in my mouth. I don't trust you. Why should I? You are, at least in some degree, the accomplice of the worst men in the world. Your very coming to me this afternoon may be only a trap. Don't you know me better than that? Said Mark. Oh, stop talking nonsense, said Dimble. Stop posturing and acting, if only for a minute. Who are you to talk like that? They have corrupted better men than you or me before now. Strake was a good man once. Philostrato was at least a great genius. Even Alcazan, yes, I know who your head is, was at least a plain murderer. Something better than they have now made of him. Who are you to be exempt? Mark gasped. The discovery of how much Dimble knew had suddenly inverted his whole picture of the situation. No logic was left in him. Nevertheless, continued Dimble, knowing all this, knowing that you may be only the bait in the trap, I will take a risk. I will risk things compared with which both our lives are a triviality. If you seriously wish to leave the NICE, I will help you." One moment it was like the gates of paradise opening. Then, at once, caution and the incurable wish to temporize rushed back. The chink had closed again. I'd need to think that over," he mumbled.
Ever considered what deaf people see?
Chapter 2. They were met in the street outside by a large body of their fellow citizens who had accompanied them to the palace, and who had been spending the time since their departure in listening by turns at the keyhole of the front door. But as the hall of audience was at the other side of the palace, and cut off from the front door by 2 other doors, a flight of stairs, and a long passage, they had not heard very much of what had gone on inside, and they surrounded the 3 spokesmen as they came out, and questioned them eagerly. "Has he taken off the tax on jam?" asked Ulrich the smith. "What is he going to do about the tax on mixed biscuits?" shouted Klaus von der Flue, who was a chimney sweep of the town and loved mixed biscuits. "Never mind about tea and mixed biscuits," cried his neighbor, Meyer of Sarnen. "What I want to know is whether we shall have to pay for keeping sheep any more." "What did the governor say?" asked Jost Weiler, a practical man, who liked to go straight to the point. The 3 spokesmen looked at one another a little doubtfully. "Well," said Werner Stauffacher at last, "as a matter of fact, he didn't actually say very much. It was more what he did, if you understand me, than what he said." "I should describe His Excellency the Governor," said Walter first, "as a man who has got a way with him, a man who has got all sorts of arguments at his fingertips." At the mention of fingertips, Arnold of Melchthal uttered a sharp howl. "In short," continued Walter, "after a few minutes' very interesting conversation, he made us see that it really wouldn't do, and that we must go on paying the taxes as before." There was a dead silence for several minutes, while everybody looked at everybody else in dismay. The silence was broken by Arnold of Sewa. Arnold of Sewa had been disappointed at not being chosen as one of the 3 spokesmen, and he thought that if he had been so chosen, all this trouble would not have occurred. "The fact is," he said bitterly, "that you 3 have failed to do what you were sent to do. I mention no names, far from it, but I don't mind saying that there are some people in this town who would have given a better account of themselves. What you want in little matters of this sort is, if I may say so, tact. Tact, that's what you want. Of course,
and instead of opposing it as they should have, they probably would have when the last guy was in office, the red team mostly almost across the board, turned a blind eye to this executive rulemaking, unconstitutional power in the executive branch to the ATF to just ban this product. And many of their same supporters made excuse after excuse after excuse. I don't care about this. There are much more important things. This is just a kiddie toy. I don't need it. It's unimportant. Over and over and over. I often heard things like, "Yeah, I agree, but yeah, we got bigger fish to fry." So they would just let it happen. And if you're paying attention, I think this is basically what Otis was warning about. And I'll get back to his letter here in just a moment, or his paper here in just a moment. But basically, once you do that, they're always going to do more. And if you're paying attention to what some things going on right now, it's very possible that they're going to use that particular ban to expand it to arm braces next. We don't know how exactly that'll play out, but if they don't do it this year under this administration, a future administration is going to get the idea and do it in the future, because people timidly turned a blind eye to this obvious constitutional violation. Going back to James Otis, he put it this way: a free government never degenerated into tyranny all at once. It happens step by step. It is the work of years, he writes. There is nothing, however, will in the end more surely work the destruction of liberty than a prevailing opinion that it is better tamely to submit than nobly assert and vindicate our privileges. And I think that bears repeating. He says there is nothing that will guarantee a destruction of liberty than having an opinion that it's better to submit than to ruffle feathers or to do something about it. And I think a lot of people, politicians and their backers on Team Red, have tamely submitted to that bump stock ban. I mean, that's just one example of many. And we see Team Blue, they all tamely submit when it's their team in charge or doing it. Or maybe they just think, well, I got to deal with something else. And Otis he just didn't mince words at all. And this type of approach certainly leads to the destruction of liberty over years. And his great friend Samuel Adams, and Otis and Adams worked together for a long time. They wrote the famous Massachusetts Circular Letter together. They did a lot of organizing together, and on and on. Samuel Adams put it almost the same way in October of 1771, writing as Candidus in the Boston Gazette. And he wrote it this way: "Let us remember that if we suffer tamely a lawless attack upon our liberty, we encourage it and involve others in our doom." I'm curious what you guys think. I'm leaning towards this direction rather than the person, or let's call them the character, who advocates more government all the time. We know what to expect from them. We know how to oppose them. I think more dangerous than that is the person who claims to be in support of the Constitution, but either lies about it, is ignorant, refuses to research it, refuses to care what the founders had to say, doesn't change their view when it's pointed out that the founders disagreed with them or the Constitution doesn't authorize what they think. I think that's a very, very dangerous character as well. But maybe James Otis is correct. The person who knows there is a problem, the person who is aware that there's a violation of liberty, a violation of the Constitution happening, and is willing to turn a blind eye, willing to let it happen because they either like the people in power, they just think it's too small of an issue, or now is not the time, we're at war, is one that we've heard over and over and over the years. Maybe that is them. I don't really know. I'm curious what you think, whether you leave your thoughts in the comments or send me an email, team@10thamendmentcenter.com. I'm very interested in what you have to say. And maybe I haven't even thought of all the other options. Or what's your view on what James Otis had to say? Either way, I hope you guys found this interesting, educational. I hope it made you think a little bit, get the wheels turning. It definitely is for me. I think when we get down to it,
"There is no time," said Dimble, "and there really is nothing to think about. I am offering you a way back into the human family, but you must come at once." "Oh, it's a question affecting my whole future career." "Your career," said Dimble. "It's a question of damnation or a last chance. But you must come at once." "I don't think I understand," said Mark. "You keep on suggesting some kind of danger. What is it? And what powers have you to protect me, or Jane, if I do bolt?" "You must risk that," said Dimble. "I can offer you no security. Don't you understand? There is no security for anyone now. The battle has started. I'm offering you a place on the right side. I don't know which will win." "Well, as a matter of fact," said Mark, "I had been thinking of leaving, but I must think it over. You put things in rather an odd way." "There is no time," said Dimble. "Supposing I look you up again tomorrow. Do you know that you'll be able? Or in an hour? Come, that's only sensible. Will you be here in an hour's time?" "What can an hour do for you? You are only waiting in the hope that your mind will be less clear. But will you be here?" "If you insist. But no good can come of it." I want to think, said Mark. and left the room without waiting for a reply. Mark had said he wanted to think. In reality, he wanted alcohol and tobacco. He had thoughts in plenty, more than he desired. One thought prompted him to cling to Dimble as a lost child clings to a grown-up. Another whispered to him, "Madness. Don't break with the NICE. They'll be after you. How can Dimble save you? You'll be killed." A third implored him not, even now, to write off as a total loss his hard-won position in the inner ring at Belbury. There must be some middle course. A fourth recoiled from the idea of ever seeing Dimble again. The memory of every tone Dimble had used caused horrible discomfort. And he wanted Jane, and he wanted to punish Jane for being a friend of Dimble's. And he wanted never to see Wither again, and he wanted to creep back and patch things up with Wither somehow. He wanted to be perfectly safe, and yet also very nonchalant and daring, to be admired for manly honesty among the Dimbles, and yet also for realism and knowingness at Belbury. To have 2 more large whiskies, and also to think everything out very clearly and collectedly. And it was beginning to rain, and his head had begun to ache again. Damn the whole thing. Damn. Why had he such a rotten heredity? Why had his education been so ineffective? Why was the system of society so irrational? Why was his luck so bad? He began walking rapidly. It was raining quite hard as he reached the college lodge. Some sort of van seemed to be standing in the street outside, and there were 3 or 4 uniformed men in capes. He remembered afterwards how the wet oilskin shone in the lamplight. A torch was flashed in his face. "Excuse me, sir," said one of the men. "I must ask for your name." "Studdock," said Mark. "Mark Gainsby Studdock," said the man. "It is my duty to arrest you for the murder of William Hingist." 4. Dr. Dimble drove out to St. Anne's dissatisfied with himself, haunted with the suspicion that if he had been wiser or more perfectly in charity with this very miserable young man, he might have done something for him. "Did I give..."
Dang it, you would have left those jars. Busted them.
If you will go rushing into the governor's presence. But we didn't rush, said Walter first. Shouting out that you want the taxes abolished. But we didn't shout, said Walter first. I really cannot speak if I am to be constantly interrupted, said Arnold of Sewa severely. What I say is that you ought to employ tact. Tact, that's what you want. If I have been chosen to represent the Swiss people in this affair, I am not saying I ought to have been, mind you. I merely say, if I had been, I should have acted rather after the following fashion. Walking firmly, but not defiantly, into the tyrant's presence, I should have broken the ice with some pleasant remark about the weather. The conversation once started, the rest would have been easy. I should have said that I hoped His Excellency had enjoyed a good dinner. Once on the subject of food, and it would have been the simplest of tasks to show him how unnecessary taxes on food were, and the whole affair would have been pleasantly settled while you waited. I do not imply that the Swiss people would have done better to have chosen me as their representative. I merely say that this is how I should have acted had they done so. And Arnold of Sewa twirled his mustache and looked offended. His friends instantly suggested that they should be allowed to try where the other 3 had failed, and the rest of the crowd, beginning to hope once more, took up the cry. The result was that the visitors' bell of the palace was rung for the second time. Arnold of Sewa went in, and the door was banged behind him.
Will revolt.
5 minutes later he came out, sucking the first finger of his left hand. No, he said, it can't be done. The tyrant has convinced me. I knew he would, said Arnold of Melchthal. Then I think you might have warned me, snapped Arnold of Sewa, dancing with the pain of his burnt finger. Was it hot? Boiling? Ah. Then he really won't let us off the taxes? Asked the crowd in disappointed voices. No. Then the long and short of it is, said Walter Fürst, drawing a deep breath, that we must rebel. Rebel? Cried everybody. Rebel, repeated Walter firmly. We will, cried everybody. Down with the tyrant, shouted Walter Fürst. Down with the taxes, shrieked the crowd. A scene of great enthusiasm followed. The last words were spoken by Werner Stauffacher. We want a leader, he said. I don't wish to thrust myself forward, began Arnold of Sewa, but I must say, if it comes to leading... And I know the very man for the job, said Werner Stauffacher. William Tell. Hurrah for William Tell! Roared the crowd.
When I was a kid,
and taking the time from Werner Stauffacher,
movie
they
period,
burst into
they
the
have a
grand old Swiss chant which runs as follows. For he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow, and so say all of us. And having sung this till they were all quite hoarse, they went off to their beds to get a few hours' sleep before beginning the labors of the day. End of chapter 2.
Remembrance of Clayton Moore, my first Western
Chapter
hero,
3.
and Jay Silverhill. Steve, they were really something else.
Hi-yo,
In its picturesque
Silver,
little shout,
away! Get him up, Scout!
covered with snow and edelweiss, as a flower grows in the Alps. Well, William Tell, his wife Hedwig, and his two sons, Walter and William. Such a remarkable man was Tell that I think I must devote a whole chapter to him and his exploits. There was really nothing he could not do. He was the best shot with the crossbow in the whole of Switzerland. He had the courage of a lion, the sure-footedness of a wild goat, the agility of a squirrel, and a beautiful beard. If you wanted someone to hurry across desolate ice fields and leap from crag to crag after a chamois, Tell was the man for your money. If you wanted a man to say rude things to the governor, it was to Tell that you applied first. Once, when he was hunting in the wild ravine of Scheschenthal, where people were hardly ever to be seen, he met the governor face to face. There was no way of getting past. On one side the rocky wall rose sheer up, while below the river roared. Directly Gessler caught sight of Tell striding along with his crossbow, his cheeks grew pale and his knees tottered, and he sat down on a rock, feeling very unwell indeed. "Aha!" said Tell. "Oho! So it's you, is it? I know you. And a nice sort of person you are, with your taxes on bread and sheep, aren't you? You'll come to a bad end one of these days. That's what will happen to you. Oh, you old reprobate. Pooh!" And he had passed on with a look of scorn, leaving Gessler to think over what he had said. And Gessler ever since had had a grudge against him, and was only waiting for a chance of paying him out. "Mark my words," said Tell's wife, Hedwig, when her husband told her about it after supper that night. "Mark my words, he will never forgive you." "I will avoid him," said Tell. "He will not see me." "Mind you do," was Hedwig's reply. On another occasion, when the governor's soldiers were chasing a friend of his, called Baumgarten, and when Baumgarten's only chance of escape was to cross the lake during a fierce storm, and when the ferryman, sensibly remarking, "What? Must I rush into the jaws of death? No man that hath his senses would do that," refused to take out his boat even for twice his proper fare, and when the soldiers rode down to seize their prey with dreadful shouts, Tell jumped into the boat, and, rowing with all his might, brought his friend safe across after a choppy passage, which made Gessler the governor still more angry with him.
Way to my temper? Was I self-righteous? Did I tell him as much as I dared? He thought. Then came the deeper self-distrust that was habitual with him. Did you fail to make things clear because you really wanted not to? Just wanted to hurt and humiliate? To enjoy your own self-righteousness? Is there a whole Bellbury inside you, too? The sadness that came over him had novelty in it. And thus, he quoted from Brother Lawrence, "Thus I shall always do, whenever you leave me to myself." Once clear of the town, he drove slowly, almost sauntering on wheels. The sky was red to westward, and the first stars were out. Far down below him in a valley, he saw the lights already lit in Cure Hardy. Thank heaven it, at any rate, is far enough from Edgestowe to be safe, he thought. The sudden whiteness of a white owl flying low fluttered across the woody twilight on his left. It gave him a delicious feeling of approaching night. He was pleasantly tired. He looked forward to an agreeable evening and an early bed. "Here he is. Here's Dr. Dimble," shouted Ivy Maggs as he drove up to the front door of the manor. "Don't put the car away, Dimble," said Denniston. "Oh, Cecil," said his wife, and he saw fear in her face. The whole household seemed to have been waiting for him. A few moments later, blinking in the lighted kitchen, he saw that this was not to be a normal evening. The director himself was there, seated by the fire, with the jackdaw on his shoulder and Mr. Bultitude at his feet. There were signs that everyone else had had an early supper, and Dimble found himself almost at once seated at the end of the table and being rather excitedly urged to eat and drink by his wife and Mrs. Maggs. "Don't stop to ask questions, dear," said Mrs. Dimble. "Go on eating while they tell you. Make a good meal." "You have to go out again," said Ivy Maggs. "Yes," said the director. "We're going into action at last. I'm sorry to send you out the moment you come in, but the battle has started." "I have already repeatedly urged," said McPhee, "the absurdity of sending out an older man like yourself, that's done a day's work for by, when here am I, a great